Leonor's path from student to queen. Every future leader has a beginning that looks ordinary. Classrooms, schedules, exams, quiet routines. But in rare cases, those ordinary beginnings are carefully designed to lead somewhere extraordinary. For Princess Leonor, the path from student to queen was never a sudden transformation. It was a gradual alignment of discipline, duty, and destiny, shaped long before the world began paying close attention. When Leonor entered school, she did not arrive as a symbol of royalty, but as a child expected to learn, to listen, and to be evaluated like everyone else. This was not accidental. Her education was designed to ground her in structure before elevating her into responsibility. Knowledge would come before authority, understanding before influence. From the beginning, her academic life carried a quiet dual purpose. On the surface, she studied subjects familiar to students everywhere: languages, history, sciences. Beneath that surface, every lesson was preparing her to interpret a nation, not merely represent it. History was never just about the past. It was about continuity, about consequences, about the cost of leadership when decisions echo across generations. Leonor learned early that Spain's story is complex, layered, and unfinished. To lead it one day would require more than symbolism. It would require comprehension. This philosophy was reinforced at home by King Felipe VI, whose own journey from prince to monarch was shaped by discipline rather than indulgence. Felipe understood that legitimacy in the modern era is earned through seriousness, not spectacle. And he passed that understanding on to his daughter, not through lectures, but through example. Leonor watched how her father carried silence as carefully as speech, how restraint could steady institutions, how preparation mattered more than popularity. These lessons did not appear in textbooks, but they shaped her more deeply than any exam. Alongside him stood Queen Letizia, whose background outside royal tradition brought a modern rigor to Leonor's development. Letizia emphasized articulation, awareness, and intellectual independence. She encouraged her daughter not just to absorb information, but to question it, to understand context, nuance, and perspective. This balance between tradition and modernity became a defining feature of Leonor's path. She was never raised to rule in isolation from the world. She was raised to understand it. As Leonor matured, the expectations around her education intensified. Language proficiency became essential, not as a ceremonial skill, but as a diplomatic tool. Communication, she learned, was not about speaking more, but about being understood clearly across cultures. Her studies were increasingly framed by responsibility. Each academic milestone carried an unspoken reminder: knowledge would one day translate into decision-making, into representation, into leadership under pressure. And then came the moment when education moved beyond classrooms. Public appearances began to carry greater weight. Speeches were no longer symbolic exercises. They were tests of composure, clarity, and emotional control. Each appearance marked a subtle transition, from observer to participant. Leonor's delivery stood out not because it was flawless, but because it was deliberate. She spoke with measured pacing, steady breath, and an awareness of audience that belied her age. These were not the habits of a performer. They were the habits of someone trained to carry meaning. The shift from student to future queen became more visible when responsibility replaced protection. Leonor was no longer simply introduced to public life, she was entrusted with it. Each event, each address, each formal duty expanded her role from learner to representative, yet what remained constant was her discipline. She continued to approach her responsibilities with the mindset of a student, listening more than asserting, observing before responding. This humility strengthened her authority rather than weakening it. People sensed that she was still learning, and that made her confidence credible. As her path progressed, the symbolism surrounding her grew heavier. Titles mattered more, protocol tightened, expectations sharpened, but Leonor did not change her posture. She did not rush forward. She absorbed the pressure quietly. This restraint sent a powerful signal. She was not being carried by destiny, she was preparing to meet it. Spain watched closely. In Spain, the monarchy exists in a delicate balance between tradition and public trust. Every gesture, every word, every silence is interpreted through a national lens shaped by history and scrutiny. Leonor's calm presence reassured many that continuity was being handled with care. Her journey was no longer just personal. It was institutional. The transformation from student to queen-in-waiting was sealed not by a single ceremony, but by consistency. By the absence of scandal. By seriousness. By readiness. When Leonor appeared in formal settings, her composure communicated something essential. She understood that leadership is not about visibility, it is about reliability. People do not need to be impressed by a monarch. They need to trust one. And trust is built slowly. Leonor's education, academic, emotional, and symbolic, has been about cultivating that trust long before it is required. She has been trained to carry pressure without reacting to it, to receive attention without seeking it, to represent without dominating. Her destiny, often described as inevitable, has in fact been shaped through effort, through structure, through patience. Destiny sealed does not mean fate without choice. It means preparation without escape. Leonor's path from student to queen is not a story of transformation, it is a story of alignment. Of a life gradually narrowing toward responsibility, not closing doors, but opening obligations. And as she steps closer to her future role, one truth becomes clear: she is not stepping into the unknown. She has been walking toward it all along. Not rushed, not distracted, not unprepared, but steady, because destiny, when met with discipline, does not arrive as a shock. It arrives as confirmation. Here is the second part, written as a direct continuation, same documentary tone and pacing, no chapters, no structural breaks, designed to flow naturally after part 1. As Princess Leonor moved further along her path, the nature of her preparation began to change. Academic excellence alone was no longer enough. Knowledge had to be tested under pressure. Discipline had to move beyond theory and into practice. This was the phase where comfort quietly ended. Leonor's transition from student to future queen required something more demanding than education: endurance. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that reshapes posture, patience, and perception. Training became less about absorbing information and more about sustaining responsibility over time. One of the defining shifts in her journey was the deliberate exposure to institutional discipline. Structure became tighter. Expectations became non-negotiable. Days were measured not by convenience, but by obligation. This was not meant to harden her, it was meant to steady her. Leadership, after all, is rarely tested in moments of ease. The presence of King Felipe VI during this stage carried particular weight. Philippe's own formation had been shaped by a deep respect for institutions, especially those tied to national continuity. From him, Leonor absorbed a critical lesson: authority does not come from asserting control, but from earning confidence through consistency. She watched how her father approached duty without theatrics, how he allowed institutions to speak louder than personality, how personal restraint could reinforce public trust. These observations quietly shaped her own approach. Leonor learned that a future monarch must be physically and mentally prepared to endure long hours, rigid protocol, and relentless scrutiny without visible fatigue. The body, in this sense, became part of the message. Fatigue shown too easily can be read as weakness. Composure under strain communicates reliability. This is why physical conditioning became integral to her formation. Not for spectacle, not for image, but for stamina. The discipline of routine, early mornings, structured schedules, repeated obligations, trained her nervous system to remain calm under demand. When discipline becomes habit, pressure loses its edge. And when pressure loses its edge, confidence takes root. Alongside this physical rigor came emotional containment. Leonor was trained not to suppress emotion, but to regulate it. In leadership, uncontrolled emotion does not read as authenticity, it reads as instability. Emotional control, on the other hand, allows empathy without vulnerability turning into distraction. She learned when to speak, and when silence served better. When presence alone was enough. When restraint carried more authority than reaction. This phase of her path also marked a noticeable shift in how she was presented to the public. She was no longer introduced primarily as a student or a daughter. She was increasingly framed as a future representative of the state. Each appearance carried symbolic weight, and with it, expectation. Yet her demeanor remained unchanged. That consistency sent a powerful signal. It suggested that the role was not altering her, it was revealing her. That the preparation had already been absorbed. That duty was no longer something external being placed upon her, but an internal framework guiding her behavior. In Spain, this mattered deeply. The monarchy's relevance depends not on charisma, but on stability. Leonor's controlled presence reassured observers that continuity was being handled with seriousness rather than haste. She did not project ambition. She projected readiness. Another crucial aspect of this stage was learning how to exist within hierarchy without needing to dominate it. Leonor was trained to function as part of an institutional system, respecting roles, procedures, and traditions older than herself. This reinforced humility, a trait often misunderstood as weakness. In reality, humility is one of the strongest foundations of authority. It allows a leader to listen, to adapt, to survive missteps without denial or defensiveness. Leonor's path made room for learning through observation rather than assertion. She was not encouraged to offer opinions prematurely. Instead, she was taught to absorb context fully before speaking. This discipline cultivated patience, a rare but essential quality in leadership. As her responsibilities grew, so did the symbolic language surrounding her. Gestures mattered, timing mattered, even stillness mattered, and through it all, Leonor demonstrated an understanding that leadership is not something you perform, it is something you inhabit. There was no sudden coronation of confidence. No dramatic turning point, only accumulation of experience, of discipline, of expectation met quietly, again and again. This is how her destiny was sealed, not by declaration, but by preparation repeated until it became instinct. By the time she stands in spaces once reserved only for monarchs, Leonor will not be stepping into unfamiliar ground. She will be standing where she has been trained to stand all along. Not elevated by ceremony, not overwhelmed by symbolism, but anchored by readiness. Her path from student to queen continues, not as a transformation yet to come, but as a responsibility already lived. And that is what makes her presence feel inevitable. As the path narrows toward its end, what becomes clear is that Princess Leonor has not been shaped by anticipation alone, but by acceptance. Acceptance of duty before desire. Of responsibility before recognition. This is the quiet transformation that defines her journey more than any ceremony ever could. By this stage, preparation is no longer visible as training. It has become instinct. Her posture, her pacing, her silences, none of these are conscious performances. They are the natural expressions of someone who has lived inside expectation long enough for it to feel familiar. This is the difference between inheritance and readiness. Leonor does not carry her future lightly, but she carries it steadily. There is no urgency in her movements, no impatience in her demeanor. She understands that continuity is not accelerated, it is maintained. And maintenance, in leadership, requires patience more than ambition. The presence of King Felipe VI remains significant, not as a shadow, but as a reference. His example has shown her that legitimacy is not granted by title alone, but by conduct sustained over time. That trust, once earned, must be protected through restraint. From Queen Letizia, Leonor absorbed another enduring truth, that credibility in the modern world demands clarity, intelligence, and emotional control. Symbols alone no longer suffice. Understanding must accompany tradition. Together, these influences shaped a future queen who does not rely on ceremony to define her authority. Her authority is already visible, in how she listens, how she waits, how she holds herself when nothing is required of her. This is where destiny settles. In Spain, history has taught that stability is fragile, and trust must be renewed across generations. Leonor's presence signals not disruption, but continuity adapted to its time. She does not represent change for its own sake. She represents reliability in an era that often lacks it. What makes her path complete is not the absence of doubt, but her relationship with it. She has learned to carry uncertainty without reacting to it, to allow questions to exist without forcing answers. This emotional maturity is what separates symbolic figures from enduring ones. When the moment arrives, whenever history determines it should, Leonor will not step forward as someone newly formed. She will step forward as someone already shaped, already tested by attention, already tempered by expectation. Her journey from student to queen has not been a story of transformation, but of alignment. Of a life gradually narrowing toward responsibility, not as a burden imposed, but as a role embraced. Destiny sealed does not suggest inevitability without effort. It suggests inevitability earned through discipline, through patience, through restraint. In a world that rewards noise, Leonor has learned the power of stillness. In a time that favors immediacy, she has learned the value of preparation. And in an age that often mistakes visibility for leadership, she has learned that authority begins long before it is acknowledged. Her future does not arrive as a question. It arrives as a continuation. And when she stands one day not as a student, not as an heir, but as queen, there will be no need for reinvention. No sudden shift in posture. No new language to learn. Because the path did not end there. It led there. And that is what makes her readiness feel complete.